And welcome back to the show. On January the 6th, rioters stormed the United States Capitol, supporting the United States president at the time, Donald Trump, in his attempt to overturn and defeat the November 2020 presidential election. After breaching multiple police perimeters, they occupied, vandalized, and ransacked parts of the building for several hours. The insurrection led to the evacuation and lockdown of the Capitol building and disrupted a joint session of Congress assembled to count the electoral votes and formalize President-elect Joe Biden's election victory. Black activists are strongly coming out against a growing narrative amongst conservatives that equates the deadly siege on the U.S. Capitol with last summer's Black Lives Matter protests of racial injustice. Joining us to tell us their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by activist and member of the Justice League NYC, Keris Love. And Keris, good to have you.
Hi, it's good to see you again.
Happy New Year. And as we speak right now, a new president, but we do have to talk about the old one for a second. The one that actually was the one who was responsible for inciting insurrection. Give me your perspective on the fact that they tried to equate it with Black Lives Matter and tried to say that the insurrection and Black Lives Matter had similar ties.
Well, the first thing is that we were out last spring, last summer, and to be quite honest, we've been out ever since we've been dropped off in this country against our will. We were out protesting the lives of Black people who were murdered by the hands of the state. So that was our fight. Our fight is like, listen, you're killing us in our homes, you're pulling us over and you're killing us, you're killing our children as they're playing in the park, and we're not receiving any justice. And so that's why we were out, trying to repeal a lot of the police reforms that allow police officers to murder us and then go free and have their records hidden. And so what we saw on January 6th, people are saying it's unprecedented, and it's not. It has happened in our history before. What we see is white supremacists trying to protect white supremacy. That is it. That is what we saw. They were very upset that their president did not win the election. He lost fair and square. And so they are afraid when white supremacy is threatened and it's like, well, they're going to take our power away, which is not going to happen with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Like, let's be clear. But the comfortability that Trump allowed them to have with their hate, they don't want to give that up. And so they wanted another 4 years to really double down on white supremacy and power. And so that's why they were storming the Capitol. Not because they're oppressed. Not in any way are they oppressed. We have elections as part of our democracy. You have an election, whoever wins, that's the president. People come out and vote, and that's what it is. And that's what happened. But they were really out there holding on to the narrative of white supremacy.
Yeah. So as you looked at the election, I'm sorry, if you look at the insurrection that took place on January 6th, walk me through what you saw and what your thoughts were.
So the first thing I saw was the United States that I know. I saw police officers not enforcing the law, not being afraid of their life. I saw, for our side, I saw that police don't need de-escalation training and all of these things. They were perfectly fine. They were actually letting them in. I saw how folks in power, police, because they have power, they do not look at the Proud Boys and the white supremacists as a threat, because those are their cousins, those are their friends, they share similar ideology. Also, this country has a way of letting us know that when Black people are coming on the scene, we need to prepare, because this country views us as being inherently violent. They do not view white people that way. But then there was also some other things, although I understand the reality of what the United States is, this illegal settler colony, what it was built on, part of me was also pretty hurt. I spent all spring, last summer, and even before 2020, being tear gassed. In August, I was shot at with pepper bullets. I had military tanks chasing myself and a group of women I organized with in Rochester, New York, because we were trying to get justice for Daniel Prude, which is a Black man that Rochester police murdered, even though they had already knew that he was having a mental health episode, and they murdered him naked in the street. And so Rochester police responded with pepper bullets, expired tear gas. They threw expired tear gas at us in the middle of a pandemic, shooting us with pepper bullets. I had to get away in my car with the sniper lasers on my car, not knowing if I was going to make it back to the Bronx. And so these are all the things that I've experienced just in the last couple of months. And so to see them break through a federal building, taking pictures of legal documents, stealing Nancy Pelosi's laptop. I mean, it was emotional because of every time I went out into the streets, we didn't know if we were going to make it back, just for saying, could you stop killing Black people? And so there were a bunch of emotions that I felt, two sides of emotions, but I think overall, I watched that and said, the United States really do not care about Black bodies.
So walk me back to the Capitol for a minute, because as you talked about those who are taking selfies and those who opened the way for insurrectionists to be able to make their way to the Capitol, we are talking about a certain portion of the police. It's not all. I mean, we did see those who were fighting. We did see those who were resisting against those protesters, the insurrectionists that were entering in. As a matter of fact, we saw the story of a young African-American man who actually led a bunch of people who were getting ready to hit the Senate away from the Senate. Talk to us about, that, because I think in many times when we talk about police, that there is this overarching theme that all police are bad. But I want to get your clarity on that. Do you feel as all police are bad, or are we just highlighting the ones in your statement that spoke to the ones that did negative?
So I think that there's police are people when they go home at night. And when I saw that Black man alone trying to stop them from coming up the steps, and at one point running away, my heart broke for him, because it's clear that he signed up for a job to protect and serve. Unbeknownst to him, the culture and the history of our policing system in this country started on slave catching. And I know I had Black cops reach out to me and say, I cannot believe that happened, especially knowing what I know you went through. And my heart is broken, because they actually signed up to protect and serve the people. And now they have colleagues of theirs that left them hanging. That Black officer, it was also a Black woman who has lost her job because she hit back one of the white supremacists who punched her. And so they signed up to protect and serve, because that's what we say the police do. But then to know that your colleague is out the way, to let them in, his fellow officers left him hanging because white supremacy was more important than protecting and serving the people. And so I can't even imagine what he might be going through right now. He did his job, but that blue line will go out the window. If I'm a white officer, or if I'm an officer that upholds white supremacy, I'm going with that side. And so now you have that dynamic happening where he was left all alone to protect the Capitol. And I think it also showed us that we never said that blue lives did not matter. What we said is that Black lives matter as well as everyone else, and we would like to be treated as such. And so in that moment, that officer was not only an officer, but he also was a Black man whose life did not matter at that moment, because his fellow officers chose white supremacy over protecting and serving.
So talk to me about the incoming presidential administration, President Joe Biden, also Vice President Kamala Harris, the first African-American vice president ever to be elected in United States history, as well as the first person of Asian descent. ever to take the place of being a vice president. Give me your thoughts on what you're hoping and your emotions of the recent inauguration.
I'm first hoping that, and not just hoping, I'm actually extremely confident about this. I'm really confident that Joe Biden and Kamala will get a handle on the coronavirus, which is still prevalent. That did not go anywhere. It's still disproportionately impacting Black and brown and poor communities. And we're seeing with the rollout with the vaccine, our own mayor here in New York City is saying we're going to run out of vaccines soon. So I'm very confident that they're going to get a handle on that, which is kind of like the first pandemic that we're living in. And so that is like the immediate need to stop the bleeding, because hospitalizations are going up, people are getting sick. And so as far as that is concerned, I'm very confident that they're going to restore that science matters in this country. I think they're going to restore our relationships globally. We are not looking favorable around the world, not just with how the last president handled the pandemic, but also how he handled the pandemic, handled the racial injustice uprisings, and all of these things. So I'm confident that they're going to at least reset us. And that's important before we can actually move on and do the real systemic change. So I know that he's going to be signing a bunch of executive orders. I'm looking for the first 100 days for Americans to be able to breathe again. And then the real work can happen, because we've just experienced 4 years of serious trauma.
What about civil rights? I mean, obviously, that's of importance to yourself, and that's what you fight for, civil rights and social justice. Talk to us about your perspective on this new administration and the look at social justice. We're going to see a new attorney general, if confirmed, Merrick Garland, the former Supreme Court nominee who was blocked by the Republican Party from getting an up or down vote. He'll actually take the place of being the attorney general. Are you optimistic that this administration and this incoming attorney general, if confirmed, will be able to bring forth much needed change?
Well, I think that I'm actually going to put a little bit of the pressure on them. After what Black activists and organizers led by Stacey Abrams and a team of Black women just did in Georgia, it would be in their best interest to take civil rights and social justice extremely seriously. We are always asked every 4 years to save this country, and then we walk away getting crumbs no matter who's the president. So after handing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris the presidency and flipping Georgia, it would really be in their best interest to listen to Black organizers and Black activists, because we're not looking for the moderate middle of the road anymore. We're looking for HR 40, for reparations, the study bill to be passed immediately. Some of us don't even understand what we need to study, but we'll take the course. We're looking for the no-knock warrants federally to be abolished. Like, we're looking for those things, and we're not asking, we're demanding. And we've already shown that we're going to work electoral politics system. So it really would be in their best interest to do what they need to do for the Black community, specifically, who's been upholding this country since 1619. So I guess I'm optimistic, but on the other hand, I'm almost like, yeah, you owe us. So what you got to show us?
Right. Talk to me about activism. Do you think that with what we've seen recently, the wave of insurrection that took place at the Capitol, do you think that this has fueled activism, excuse me, particularly on the part of those in the African-American community and communities of color?
Well, so I do want to, not to alarm people, is that what we saw on January 6th was a dress rehearsal. These folks are not going to go away. They're not. And we've seen it in our history before. as far as the fuel in the Black community or Black organizers and activists, those of us who've been in this fight since forever will continue to be in this fight. But I have experienced the community asking, how can they find their assignment? Like, what is my assignment in all of this because of what I watched? And in their mind, it's like, well, Joe Biden won the presidency, so we shouldn't have any issues. And they're realizing that the extreme, because we need to call them extremists because that's what they are. If they were brown, if they were Muslim, that's what they would have been called. These extremists are here to stay, and people are trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we take over? How do we regain power? How do we help with the fight? And so it is our job to continue to organize, to continue to actually talk about the history. We saw this in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. It was the biggest massacre that happened for 100 years. They didn't talk about it. Same situation. White supremacists were mad because Black people were coming into the state legislature and gaining power 30 years after emancipation, and stormed businesses, stormed the state capitol, and all those things. So when we talk about our history, it'll help us to know where we're going and how to handle these situations and not really sit in the shock and do the work and move forward, because it's going to take us and the administration. Like, I'm not expecting to say, well, we flipped Georgia, you won, and that's it, and leave it on Kamala and Joe Biden, because that's not fair. We have to still continue to organize. We have to still continue to stay in the streets safely, and we have to still continue to educate in our communities.
So where do we go from here? I mean, where does your work go? I mean, obviously, a new administration doesn't mean that new things happen automatically, but it does mean that we have to take a look at some things and possibly revisit some things. Talk about the work that you're doing right now and what you like to see accomplished.
So where do we go from here? I want to highlight some congressional races here, especially here locally. We got Dr. Jamal Bowman to Congress, who's representing parts of the Bronx and Westchester. And he is a former middle school principal who supports reparations, who supports defunding the police and all of those things like that. We've got Cori Bush out of St. Louis, who is an activist, who is now in Congress. And so wins like that are really important because the president and vice president can't do it alone. And so where do we go from here? We continue to work with these folks that we supported that are now in office, that will be passing legislation, that will be writing bills and introducing legislation. That's where we go from here. We stay on top of the administration. We do not stop campaigning our campaigns and needs. We do not stop phone banking. We do not stop marching. We do not stop protesting. We do not stop digitally organizing. We don't stop any of those things. And we continue to have meetings with those in Congress, and we look forward to, I mean, we did it in Georgia, but we look forward to really shaking up the Senate. I mean, we saw how Mitch McConnell had all of this power and why Georgia was so important. And we have to go into communities that may not be as progressive as ours, but who are suffering from the lack of needs that we have, and do the education to understand why we need a more balance of power. And so that's where we go from here. We stay on top of the administration. We continue conversations with our congressmen and our senators, and we pay attention to we should be paying attention to who's taking Kamala Harris' seat. Her seat is now open, and that's important. We don't just say, well, she's the vice president. We will not have another Black, as of today, we won't have another Black woman. Like, she's leaving that seat now. So what does that look like? And so that's where we go from here. We continue fighting and we continue organizing.
Speak to people about how important grassroots is. Grassroots organizing has been the backbone for getting a lot of things accomplished, particularly in the area of social justice. Talk to us about how important a grassroots movement is. And for people who may not be familiar with the Justice League NYC, tell us a little bit more.
So I start with Justice League NYC is the task force of the Gathering for Justice. The Gathering for Justice was founded by Mr. Harry Belafonte, who we know was Dr. King, one of Dr. King's right-hand man, who the stories that Mr. B has about the civil rights movement are ones that I take with me into the community, which is why grassroots organizing is so important. The people closest to the problem are the people closest to the solution. So if the problem is housing or, stagnant wages, those who make minimum wage, those who are struggling to pay those bills, they understand what they need to fix these problems. And so that's why grassroots organizing is important. You can't fix the systemic issues if you don't know exactly how they impact people on an everyday level. And so that's what we do. We continue to organize with the people in the community and kind of be like that bridge between the electoral politics and talking with your elected officials, which is fine, but really base building in community, knowing what the everyday struggles are, so that way you can bring that to your elected officials. And so we know from Ella Baker and even Dr. King and even Mr. B that you don't go into communities and tell them what the problem is and how to fix it. Grassroots organizing is going into the community, finding the leaders, listening, but then just giving them the tools that they need to fix whatever's happening in their community, because they're the closest to the solution. And so that's what Justice League does all across New York City and actually across the country, because we are a nationwide activist group.
And we know that Harry Belafonte is the founder and really the foundation for the work that you actually do. Give us a little bit more about Mr. Belafonte. What have you learned from him? And is there any story or experience that speaks out to you about Harry Belafonte?
This talking with the elders always warms my soul. Mr. B says that every generation is responsible for their revolution. However, the generations before you have left you breadcrumbs, so you don't have to start from scratch. And I love that because I am responsible for how 2019, 2020, 2021, and 20 is written in the history books. But I know that I carry the legacy because this is an intergenerational fight. Mr. B, being an artist, and I'm an artist myself, a songwriter, he always tells us that artists need to use their platform for the movement. And so he would follow the lead of Dr. King. And a lot of times presidents will call Mr. B because he was this well-known, artist and musician and actor. And they would ask him, oh, what should we do? And he would say, did you call Martin? And they're like, well, we want to talk to you. And he's like, Martin's the leader, because he understood his place as an artist in the movement. One of the funny stories he told is, he said, at one point, I was just making albums so I can make money to fund the movement. And Martin would call and say, hey, I need you to meet me in Alabama because I need some money. And Mr. B will call Sidney Poitier and say, Martin needs $30,000 and we need to meet him down in Alabama, which was dangerous because we're talking Jim Crow South. And so it didn't matter that Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, they were just two Black men. So it didn't matter. But that always stays with me because we need our artists in this movement. We need people with big platforms in this movement, but we need to understand that the actual organizers are the ones with the tools for the community. And so I'm honored to still have the teachings of Dr. King and King in Nonviolence, and that we still have Mr. B here and that we have him around. And what I say to young people, because it feels like last summer was the start of the movement, And it's kind of disrespectful because our elders have been doing this. It wasn't the start of the movement, it was just a continuation because this is a marathon. And so if you know any elders, they have all the wisdom. They have all the wisdom, and we really need to be talking to them because they left us breadcrumbs, as Mr. B says.
Yeah, and it's amazing to think, and you hear the story of how everybody sees the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the work that he's doing on the forefront for civil rights, but there were so many people supporting the movement, you know, financially, supporting the movement emotionally. And here you have, even with the artistry that's actually coming and supporting the movement so that way King can be able to do it. So even though King gets a lot of the credit, we do know that it's persons such as Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Mahalia Jackson, C.L. Franklin, others that actually helped to get people to where they are today. So a life lesson that's actually pretty well learned. So for you, any future aspirations politically or such?
I get asked that question, and I won't say a hard no, but right now, my assignment is to continue the grassroots work. My assignment is to be that bridge between electoral politics and the community right now. My assignment is also to meet the needs of my community. You know, I can't ask them um, to be interested in a race and why you should vote and why you should come to this community board meeting if I'm also not addressing the fact that they don't have childcare, or I'm not addressing the fact that they're standing on the food pantry line because they've been out of work since March, right? And so that's part of my assignment, is to also meet their immediate needs, finding mutual aid to uplift my community so they have the strength to actually do the fight. So as far as political aspirations, not really sure, but I like the role that I'm in. I get to meet with elected officials. They pick my brain and say, hey, what's happening in the community? How can we best bring about this information? And I'm in the middle between the both. So right now, that's really important. That's kind of my role and my assignment, and to use my artistry, my platform, to talk about things that are kind of difficult.
All right. Keris, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Social Justice Forums. Great conversation. And again, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you. Thank you for having me.
All right, Keris Love, our guest here on the Social Justice Forums.